next question comes from Slaven Vukobrot. As CEO, will Mr. Abel be in charge of the portfolio of common stocks that Mr. Buffett has been managing, or will this function be exercised by Mr. Combs and Mr. Weschler? Yeah. As investing could be defined as the discipline of relative selection, can major capital allocation decisions, such as large acquisitions, be separated from the common stock selection process?
Yeah, I would say that decision actually will be made when I'm not around, and I may try and come back and haunt them if they do it differently. But I'm not sure the Ouija board or anything will get that job done. So that job, I'll never know the answer on whether it get covered. But I feel very comfortable about the fact that it will be made by a board that they've got loads of brain power. They've got a dedication to an unusual institution, and they will figure things out. But I would say that if I were on that board and we're making the decision, I would probably, knowing Greg, I would just leave. I would leave the capital allocation to Greg, and he understands businesses extremely well. And if you understand businesses, you understand common stocks. I mean, if you really know how business works, you are an investment manager. How much you manage, maybe just your own funds or maybe other people. And if you really are primarily interested in getting assets under management, which is where the money is, you don't really have to understand that sort of thing. But that's not the case with Ted or Todd, obviously. But I think the responsibility ought to be entirely with Greg. The responsibility has been with me, and I farmed out some of it, and I used to think differently about how that would be handled. But I think the responsibility should be that of the CEO, and whatever that CEO decides may be helpful in effectuating that responsibility. That's up to him or her to decide at the time they're running the money. But so I would say that my thinking on that has developed to some extent as the sums have grown so large at Berkshire. And we do not want to try and have 200 people around that are managing $1 billion each. It just doesn't work. And I think that when you're handling the sums that we will have, you've got to think very strategically about how to do very big things. And I think Greg is capable of doing that.
As we go through any transition, it's important to know that the capital allocation principles that Berkshire lives by today will continue to survive, Warren. And I think that's what the thing I'd want to communicate, that we have our operating businesses, insurance, non-insurance. We'll provide them the capital necessary to be successful and grow if it's appropriate. Yep. At the same time, we're expecting a return of capital from them when they have excess cash. And then, as we've discussed, or you've touched on, always looking at potentially new businesses as a whole or in a piece. And as you've always highlighted, and I fully agree, we'll always look at equities as we're investing in a business, either 1% or 100%. But we're looking at the business, we're looking at the economic prospects of that business and how sustainable it is and what it will look like 10 years from now, and is the capital we originally put in at exponential risk, or where's that risk sit, that profile? And then, of course, and then we'll obviously have our continue to always put excess cash in the safest investment there is in U.S. Treasuries, knowing we want to maintain that fortress of a balance sheet for two reasons. One, to act, but also to always protect our shareholders.
1 year earlier at Daily Journal 2023, annual meeting.
One of the interesting things about Greg is there's some things he's better at than Warren is. And Warren knows that, and he just keeps dumping on Greg. everything that Greg can do better, and it's a lot.
Matt McAllister writes in, and I realized he's asked a couple of questions. I didn't realize this was a repeat send-in, but I like the questions. He said, what are some of the most important things that we need to know about Greg Abel? Have you experienced examples of him also being a learning machine? And if so, could you share one?
He is just sensational at being a business leader, both as a thinker and as a doer. And he's also sensationally good at smoothly getting things done through other people. So he's a very remarkable human being. And Berkshire is very lucky to have him. And he's also just a tremendous learning machine. You can argue that he's just as good as Warren is learning all kinds of things. And one of the interesting things about Greg is there's some things he's better at than Warren is. And Warren knows that, and he just keeps dumping on Greg everything that Greg can do better, and it's a lot. And so the system at Berkshire is working pretty damn well. We're very lucky to have a 92-year-old that's as good shape as Warren, and we're very lucky to have a chief executive like Greg. Greg is very remarkable. Greg is trusted by utility regulators, and rightly so. He is trying to run all those utilities as if he were the regulator. Now, how many people think that way? But it's such a smart way to think.
You mean just from a show of good faith?
Yeah, why not why not do it the way that you'd want it done if you were on the other side of the transaction? How can you fail if you treat other people the way you'd like to be treated yourself? It's the golden rule. Of course it works.
1 year earlier at Berkshire, 2023 annual meeting.
All right, this question comes from Almu Grinnell, and it's this is for Warren and Greg. Since 2019, Berkshire repurchased huge amounts of stock, approximately reducing 10% of the share count and increasing the intrinsic value per share for the continuing shareholders. Greg is expected to be the successor of Warren as CEO, so will he be in charge of the main capital allocation decisions, including future share buybacks? Greg has been key in the development of Berkshire Hathaway Energy, and I think a good capital allocator. Has he been involved in the share repurchases that have been executed over the past years? And do you, both Warren and Greg, work together in the estimation of Berkshire's intrinsic value and the share buyback decisions?
Well, the answer is that Greg, I'm going to turn it over to him, but the answer is Greg understands capital allocation as well as I do, and that's lucky for us. And he will make those decisions, I think, very much in the same framework as I would make them. And we've laid out that framework now for 30 years, probably, or something like that. People make it way more complicated. I mean, particularly if you're working on a doctorate or something, it's just a great subject to have lots of footnotes and 50 pages or 100 pages. But it's no more simple. It's no more complicated than if you and I and Charlie had a business and you wanted to sell your interest, and we could buy it for less than we thought it was worth, and without misleading you in any way about what was going on, and we'd buy it. But Greg, you're on because you're going to be doing it in the future.
Right. Yeah, well, I think, Warren, you said it really well. I mean, the framework's been laid out. We know how you approach it, and how you and Charlie have approached it, and really don't see that framework changing. When the opportunity presents itself, we'll want to be an active repurchaser of Berkshire shares. We think it's a great outcome for Berkshire shareholders to own a larger piece of each of our operating businesses and the portfolio of the equity companies when the opportunity presents itself.
It can be the dumbest thing you can do, or it can be the smartest thing you can do. And to make it more complicated than that and start getting into all this, but you obviously do what the business needs to do first. The opportunities are there. Grow your present business, buy additional business, whatever it may be. And then you make a decision on dividends, but that decision becomes pretty irrevocable because you don't cut dividends without having major effects in your shareholder base and a lot of things. And then if you got ample capital and you don't see that you're going to use it all, and your stock is attractive and it enhances the intrinsic value for the remaining shareholders, it's a no-brainer. And if it's above the price of intrinsic value, it's a no-brainer that you don't even listen to anybody, no matter what investment banker comes in and tells you, here's how to do a repurchase program.
A few moments later.
This one comes from Drew Estes. This is a question for Warren. In your 1969 letter to partners, you said, in any company where the founder and chief driving force behind the enterprise is still active, it's still very difficult to evaluate second men. The only real way to see how someone is going to do when running a company is to let them run it. This wise statement now applies to Berkshire. Once the second men are running Berkshire, what would you advise owners of Berkshire to watch for? Specifically, what actions, if taken, should give us concern?
Well, I think I would have some comfort in the fact that 99% of my net worth is in that company. So I probably got a stronger interest in it. And perhaps $100 billion or more of philanthropy will be affected by it. But I would say that I don't have a second choice. I mean, it is that tough to find, but I've also seen Greg in action, and I feel 100% comfortable. And like I say, I don't know. Something happened to Greg. I would tell the directors, they have a problem, and they won't. I don't have anybody to name, and if they put somebody in, Berkshire on automatic pilot can work extremely well for a long time. I mean, it isn't like the businesses go away or any other thing sort. And you can't. It's hard to judge successor management in a really good business, because if they don't show up at the office, it'll keep working for a long time. And maybe that lack of useful input may show itself in 5 years. I mean, it may go a long time. And how are the shareholders, advised by a bunch of people that are concerned about whether you're meeting earnings projections or something, telling them whether the management's any good? It is very, very hard. It's very hard. I've been on the board of 20 companies. It's very hard if you ask me to rank the management of each one, it's very difficult to do, because some are just better businesses than others. Some would be better off not managed hardly at all. Others really need help, but they got a lousy business. And Tom Murphy told me a long time ago, he said the secret of business is to buy a good business. And it's okay to inherit one, too. And Greg is inheriting a good business, and I think he'll make it better. But I don't think it's easy to put any one of the next 10 nominees in and try and judge 3 years later whether they've done a good job or not. So it's going to be that'll be a very interesting job for the board. But it shouldn't listen to Wall Street on it. They've got the job. If they put somebody in, there's a surprise. We both go down on a plane, they put somebody in. They've got a real job in assessing that person, because it'll depend on how good he or she is as a talker. It'll depend on, them courting Wall Street to be supportive of them, all kinds of things. And we've got some very good people on the board, but they would be challenged in that position, as would I, where I've been in that position in other companies where a very great leader has left, and on the way back from the funeral, nobody knows what to do exactly. So with that cheery message, we will go to lunch.